30 minutes. That was all it would have taken for a hidden island in the Strait of Hormuz to vanish without a trace. No warning, no public announcement, no room for a second chance. Just 200 Navy SEALs advancing through complete darkness, carried by MH-60M Blackhawks flying low over the water at 150 knots, their rotors swallowed by the roar of the ocean wind as they closed in on a target that officially was never there. They were never meant to be seen, and within half an hour the island itself could have disappeared. This was no ordinary target. It appeared on no public map, its coordinates kept tightly locked away, with no press briefings, no leaks, and no outside attention. Just a small rocky island set in the middle of one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth, the Strait of Hormuz. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil passes through that narrow corridor every day. Control over that strait means far more than control over a shipping route. It means influence, it means pressure. It means a hand on the rhythm of the global economy. And out there, something remarkable had been built. Months of surveillance, intercepted signals, and human source reporting had revealed a deeply concerning picture. The island was not simply a military outpost. It was a command center, a fully functioning nerve hub concealed beneath reinforced structures designed to resist aerial observation and built to stay hidden. From inside that facility, Iranian operators were reportedly managing a complex regional network around the clock. Radar systems monitored every vessel moving through the strait. Signal intercept equipment captured communications from commercial ships, foreign naval forces, and allied intelligence platforms. Coordination lines stretched outward from that single location, guiding patrol boats, supplying targeting information, and synchronizing pressure across the wider maritime zone. It was the mind behind the operation. Remove the mind, and the entire system would go silent. The objective sounded simple, but carrying it out was anything but. Move in, recover the intelligence, and wipe the site clean. A cruise missile could have erased the island in minutes, but missiles do not retrieve hard drives. They do not recover encryption keys, communication records, or the deeper operational framework analysts had spent years trying to understand. What was stored inside that facility was considered even more valuable than the destruction of the site itself. So they sent people, 200 of them, and there was no margin for failure. 1:48 a.m. Under a moonless sky, 4 MH-60M Blackhawks lifted off with engines kept low, flying in a tight formation just above the water. Their rotors cut through the darkness only meters above the surface as they slipped beneath the radar coverage positioned along the strait. Inside the aircraft, not a word was spoken. Every operator had spent weeks practicing the mission on a full-scale replica of the target. Every hallway, every doorway, every defensive point was already fixed in memory. There was nothing left to discuss. Only timing, only movement. But the Black Hawks were only one part of a much larger operation. Far above the strait, beyond the view of anyone on the ground, 2 EA-18G Growlers from the USS Theodore Roosevelt had already been conducting electronic warfare for 18 minutes. Their ALQ-99 pods were saturating Iranian radar and communication frequencies across the area with such precise interference that screens from Bandar Abbas to Sheshem Island were reduced to static. Iranian crews were not tracking an incoming force. They were resetting systems, checking equipment, and calling for technical support, unaware that the real threat was already moving inside the electronic blackout. At the same time, 4 FA-18F Super Hornets were already in position, flying fast and low after launching from the Roosevelt. Armed with AGM-88 HARM missiles and Mark 83 bombs, they had one clear mission: break the island's defenses before the first SEAL reached the ground. At 1:52 a.m., they struck. The first pair hit the coastal gun positions with pinpoint accuracy. In just 4 seconds, both sites were gone. The second pair followed immediately, locking onto the communications tower on the island's high ground and the backup radar array. The tower was hit directly and collapsed from the base. The radar system vanished in the same instant. Then came the AH-6 Little Birds. Small, fast, and incredibly agile, 3 of them swept in from the north at just 30 feet above the surface. Their chin-mounted miniguns came alive as they moved through the remaining defensive positions in one tightly coordinated pass. Machine gun nests, mortar crews, and even a vehicle-mounted heavy weapon that had survived the earlier strike and had just begun turning toward the incoming Blackhawks were all taken out almost instantly. Above the entire scene, 2 FA-18Cs maintained combat air patrol, cleared to respond to any Iranian aircraft that might launch from the mainland. None appeared. The Growlers had already made sure of that. No warning had gone out. No scramble order had reached anyone in time. No warning ever reached an airbase that could react in time. The entire aerial phase had been completed in less than 4 minutes. At 1:54 a.m., boots hit the ground. The Black Hawks dropped hard into the landing zones, and the SEALs were moving before the skids had fully settled. They were already advancing, already under pressure. Gunfire burst from the eastern ridge, with tracers slicing across the night sky. A machine gun crew hidden inside a hardened fighting position had somehow survived the opening strikes. The FA-18SS had avoided that spot earlier because hitting it directly risked damaging the underground facility below. Now that position was active again. Rounds swept across the landing zone. One Black Hawk, still climbing away, took hits along its tail section. The aircraft shook, but the pilot kept it steady and brought it out. The island was still very much in the fight. One SEAL team locked the position in place while another moved around from the south. 90 seconds later, the machine gun nest was out of action. Under direct fire, moving uphill with no time to lose, 90 seconds. That is what 200 Navy SEALs look like when every second already matters. While the battle continued above ground, the breaching team reached the entrance to the underground complex. It was hidden in the eastern rock face, impossible to spot from above unless you already knew exactly where to look. The door was reinforced steel, layered and hardened, built to withstand almost anything short of a dedicated bunker-busting strike. But the team had brought charges designed specifically for that door. They had trained on that exact setup for weeks. At 1:58 a.m., the charge went off. 11 seconds later, the way in was open. Inside, it was all darkness and machinery, the hum of cooling systems, the scent of electronics, and narrow strips of emergency red light along the walls. It was enough to see, but not enough to slow anyone down. What followed inside those corridors was a completely different kind of battle. No long sight lines, no distance, no air cover, just tight spaces, doorways, and split-second decisions. Peel, stack, breach, clear, move. The defenders inside resisted hard, but they were overwhelmed. Right behind the assault element, the intelligence team never stopped working. Hard drives were removed, bags were filled. Communication logs were pulled from live terminals. Gunfire echoed just meters away, and they kept going. An explosion went off 2 rooms over, and they kept going. Every second spent gathering data mattered. At 2:02 a.m., the situation above ground shifted fast. Iranian fast boats were now inbound from the nearest coastal base, multiple contacts cutting across the water at speed. A quick reaction force had launched from the mainland. The 30-minute window was shrinking by the second. Then a single word came across the command net: accelerate. Demolition charges were placed across every critical system inside the facility. Server banks, communications nodes, and the entire power network. The team moved as if the structure was already lost, because in every way that mattered, it was. At 2:06 a.m., the collection phase was finished. At 2:07 a.m., the final charges were armed. At 2:08 a.m., they started moving back to the surface. The extraction was where the mission came closest to unraveling. The remaining defenders had regrouped. By then, they knew the Black Hawks would return, so they focused everything on the landing zones. Every weapon still functioning, every fighter still able to hold a position, poured fire across the exposed ground between the underground complex and the extraction points. The security element covering those landing zones had already been under constant contact for 14 minutes. Ammunition was running low. 2 operators were wounded. Even so, they stayed in the fight and held their ground. The moment the teams emerged from below and began crossing the open terrain, the volume of fire spiked again. Shots came in from 3 directions, and RPGs were starting to dial in the range. That was when the AH-6 Little Birds came screaming back in, flying low along the extraction routes with their miniguns blazing, cutting down every position that tried to line up on the landing zones. The pilots flew with incredible precision, reading threats before they had fully developed and suppressing fire before it could become decisive. 2 passes, then 3. The incoming fire never fully stopped, but it never found the result it was looking for. At 2:10 a.m., the MH-60M Black Hawks came back into the hottest fire of the entire operation. The pilots held steady over active gun positions, took hits, and stayed on station just long enough to load their teams before pulling away. The extraction happened in rolling waves, with one group lifting off while others continued fighting to hold the perimeter. That perimeter kept shrinking, team by team, until the last operator finally broke contact and sprinted for the final aircraft. At 2:13 a.m., the last SEAL was on board. Rotors lifted. 47 seconds later, the island answered. The demolition charges began firing in sequence. First the server banks, then the communications relays, then the power systems. The underground complex did not simply go dark, it collapsed in on itself. Corridors folded inward. Equipment was fused into twisted wreckage that no recovery team would ever be able to piece back together. Seconds later, the surface structures followed. Radar arrays, antenna clusters, signal towers that had quietly gathered intelligence for years. All of it disappeared within 90 seconds. Flames rose 200 feet into the night. At 2:31 a.m., the island was still burning when the B-2 arrived. It had already been in the air for 11 hours, having launched from Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri before the SEALs had even finished their final briefing. It crossed the ocean on a long-range route, refueled twice in the air by KC-135 Stratotankers, and remained unseen by every radar system along the way. The B-2 Spirit never really shows up the way other aircraft do. Its radar signature is so small, it can be mistaken for something as minor as a large bird. It had already been holding above the area for 20 minutes before the SEAL teams even moved in, waiting quietly for the next phase. Then the clearance came through. In a single pass, it released 2 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, each weighing 30,000 pounds and built to drive deep through hardened concrete before going off. The weapons dropped in near silence, their guidance fins making tiny adjustments all the way down. Then came 2 impacts, followed by 2 deep underground blasts rather than surface strikes. The island heaved upward in 2 separate places as the chambers below gave way completely. Fires already spreading from the earlier demolition phase were briefly smothered by the shock waves, only to flare again as ruptured fuel lines fed fresh fire into the wreckage. Whatever remained intact after the ground team pulled out, the B-2 ensured it would not remain that way for long. Then the Spirit faded back into the darkness, already miles away and climbing before the dust had even settled over the strait. No public statement followed, no accessible record acknowledged the mission. Officially, it had never happened. At 2:47 a.m., the Strait of Hormuz fell silent. The patrol boats that had depended on the island for targeting information were suddenly operating without it. The signal intercept teams that had been passing intelligence up the chain had nothing left to pass along. The radar picture, once processed and distributed through that facility, went blank. Not weakened, not interrupted, but completely gone. Every part of the network that had relied on the island was left cut off, functioning without coordination, without guidance, and without the central hub that had just disappeared. And what left the strait inside those Blackhawks may have mattered even more than the damage left behind. By 2:15 a.m., encryption keys, communication logs, operational schematics, names, contacts, methods, and behavioral patterns were already in American hands. Analysts had spent years trying to piece together that picture from fragments. In less than 9 minutes inside the facility, the teams recovered material that could support intelligence work for years. It could open doors into networks the island had spent a long time building. It could give analysts the ability not only to monitor Iranian maritime operations, but to anticipate them, interrupt them, and quietly unravel them from within. That is the part people rarely focus on when they talk about a raid like this. The operation itself lasted 30 minutes. What came out of it could shape events for far longer. 30 minutes on the ground, one pass from a ghost in the sky. The island was gone. The network went dark. The strait fell quiet. And somewhere above the Persian Gulf, already climbing beyond radar reach, already fading from view, the Spirit turned toward home.